Christians are under fire, quite literally, and not just in Nigeria or around the world, but right here in the United States. And the incident in Nashville, the mass shooting, has got to be understood for what it is, an anti-Christian act. An act of terrorism against a Christian school, and by the way, an accompanying Christian church, by a transgender shooter who appears to have been motivated by transgender ideology. Now, how do we know this? Well, we know it in part because there is a manifesto, and the manifesto is being withheld. It's being concealed. And in fact, I saw an article that LGBTQ activists are demanding that the manifesto not be released. In other words, that the motivation not be made clear. This allows outlets like CNN to go, officials are still searching for the motivation. They actually know the motivation. They're just not telling us what it is. Now, the only honest headline about this episode is from the New York Post. I'm reading the headline, "Transgender Killer Targets Christian School." Boom. Says it right there. Identifies the victim, identifies the victimizer. This doesn't identify the ideology, but that is presumed behind it. And contrasts this with the lying headline in Reuters, which I'm going to read you now. "Former Christian school student kills 3 children, 3 staff in Nashville shooting." So the shooter is not identified as trans, but is identified as a former Christian school student. The assumption being that this is some intramural Christian dispute. The former student is upset with the school. There's probably some beef with the school's policies. And then I look at all these headlines, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Chicago Tribune, pretty typical, 6 dead in shooting at Nashville school. They exclude the word transgender, they exclude the word Christian. Now let's turn to this manifesto that's being withheld. I think what's really telling about it is if white supremacy is to blame for hate crimes committed in its name, shouldn't transgenderism be blamed for hate crimes committed in its name? Is this why the LGBTQ activists are trying to suppress the public release of the manifesto of the Nashville school trans mass murderer? I turn on the channel to NBC, and guess what I see? I basically see a segment on how this is going to have really troubling reverberations of fear, not in the Christian community, but in the trans community. In other words, the perpetrators have now somehow suddenly become the victims. Let me read you the NBC headline. This is from NBC's own tweet. "Fear pervades Tennessee's trans community amid focus on Nashville shooter's gender identity." So NBC has decided that the perpetrators are the real victims. Transgender domestic terrorists raise the prospect that the transgender community as a whole will suffer stigma. Let's all feel really sorry for transgenders after this horrible incident that they now have to live through. Not one word of mention, not one word of sympathy for the Christians. And in fact, here's a headline. This is from the British paper Daily Mail. Exclusive, "Nashville mass shooter was rejected by her Christian parents." And kind of dissecting what they're getting at here, what they seem to be getting at, it's the Christian's own fault. The Christian parents rejected this young woman who's transitioning to becoming a man. Audrey is becoming Aiden. And it was because of that she or he was driven to commit the acts that were committed. So the Christians, in other words, go from being the victims to now being, in a sense, the cause or even the perpetrator. And amazingly, trans activists have planned, they had this planned before the incident, but they haven't canceled it. It's on April 1. It's called Trans Day of Vengeance. Think about that. Think about the title of that. Not a trans day of protest against some Tennessee law, but Trans Day of Vengeance. And I mentioned yesterday on the podcast, you've got these trans activists who not only have t-shirts and slogans showing themselves with weapons, but you also have videos that I've shared and others have shared on TikTok where you've got trans activists with loaded AR weapons, and they're clicking them, basically, essentially creating a public threat or a public taunt. Like, if you reject us, we don't just reject you. If you reject us, we are out to kill you.